the Taliban have not changed. If I were to tell someone how's the situation, I'd be like, oh, you remember the Taliban in 1996 to 2001? Do you remember how they were? Do you remember them in the past 20 years of their insurgency, the state of Afghanistan? That's literally, it's the exact same thing. Nothing has changed. In terms of governance, in terms of their how they're ruling, the exact same way. In terms of their policies and their ideology, exactly the same from the past 20 years. The terrorist and ideology in their practices, we saw it during those first few days. After August 15th, we saw them conducting military parades, celebrating, right? And in those military parades, we saw, for example, them showing off all their weapons that they used in the past 20 years, specifically suicide bombs, IEDs. Basically, they were on the loudspeaker, and there was translations to these videos, subtitles on the bottom saying, this is our infamous suicide vest that we used to defeat the occupiers. When in reality, those suicide vests killed thousands upon thousands of innocent civilians and soldiers who were just defending the country, but mainly civilians. We saw, 20 years of straight up terrorism. One of the things that they promised to the world was they will respect human rights, right? We clearly see that they're violating human rights. That's one of the main things. In Kabul, in the middle of intersections, you have these Taliban soldiers in every province, but specifically the cameras where you would see it in Kabul, where they're at an intersection, and there'd be a woman, young girl crossing the street. Maybe her scarf wasn't fully covering her face or something like that. And when the Taliban would see her crossing, he would just be whipping her as she's walking by. The floggings for supposedly a man supposedly not having a beard, or on an accusation of committing adultery, therefore they go out and they stone a young man or woman. These are violations of human rights, right, in the 21st century. The other thing they mentioned was they promised was an inclusive government, right? They promised inclusivity, but we saw when they announced their cabinet in, I think it was mid to late September, it was a cabinet of all men, their own men. It's not they elected certain men from different ethnic groups and religious groups throughout the country. No. They specifically chose their own Taliban members, who are essentially all former Guantanamo Bay inmates and people who are on the FBI wanted lists with bounties on their heads. These terrorists became this government, this cabinet that they're showing to the world. And then for some reason we have either diplomats or the mainstream media or analysts, whatever. It's they're all either being apologetic, or they're just making it whitewashing, right? This terrorist organization saying that, oh, they've changed, oh, this is the reformed Taliban, we have to give them a chance. It just defies all logic, the common sense, that this has been happening. And one of the other things was that they promised were that they wouldn't give safe haven to terrorists, that they would cut off ties with terrorists, which is the most absurd thing, because it's you have to cut off ties with terrorists. As if they're not terrorists themselves, right? It's oh yeah, you just blew up people for 20 years straight. You literally terrorized the country. The war on terror was against you guys, but you guys have to cut off terrorists when you come into power. They didn't end their own terrorist activities, right? We mentioned they had an official ministry, an office, right? And they had their sign up on the wall and everything. And they announced that this is our newly formed suicide squad of our general army, or suicide unit. Remember when they paid the family members of suicide bombers? Where that's insane. It's the people are starving. There's no jobs. There's no economy. There's no progress or anything. And what do? You go and you pay the family members of suicide bombers, saying thank you for what you've done in the past 20 years. Here's I don't know how many $100 for blowing up innocent, for your son who blew up innocent civilians. So the other thing was the general amnesty, where they promised general amnesty. That was also fake. Supposedly they promised to not retaliate or arrest or have revenge killings against the former government officials or the former ANDSF or security forces in the country, but we saw that was also fake. So yeah, none of this held true. They didn't hold to these phony, to begin with, these promises that were absolutely baseless to begin with, and that's been ongoing till today. This ongoing violence that we have seen. Some might say, "Oh well, at least the war is over and they've brought peace," but yeah, the U.S. troops pulled out, NATO pulled out, but nothing actually. The war didn't actually end, right? Because we continuously see these suicide bombings that the Taliban themselves claimed for the past 20 years, proudly took responsibility for. Now they're coming out and like condemning it, when every other week, every other day, we see a suicide bombing in mosques all over the country. So that's how I would put it in a nutshell for you. That's what's been happening since August 15th.